The sound came just before dawn. A wet, uneven thud against old wood, like something half alive was being dragged across the floor of Caleb Harlan's barn. Outside, the rain hadn't let up for hours. It came steady and cold, soaking the prairie grass and pooling under the sagging eaves of the house, the barn, the broken fence that once kept a dozen longhorns in line. Now it was only Caleb and the horses, and the silence he'd grown used to since Maddie passed 4 winters ago. He stood at the window in his undershirt, coffee in hand, listening. His bones were too old for guessing games. 40, though the mirror said older. The barn should have been empty. His stallion, Cole, had spooked earlier that week and hadn't calmed since. He set the coffee down, shrugged on a coat, and reached for his rifle, not out of fear, just habit. Something in that sound wasn't right. It wasn't animal. It wasn't wind. It was pleading. The door groaned as he opened it, wind pushing against him like it meant something. He lit a lantern and crossed the yard, boots sinking into the mud. Every few steps, the sound came again, barely audible over the patter of rain. When he reached the barn, the air inside was thick, sour, humid with something more than horse sweat. Then he saw her, tied to the hitching rail. A girl. Or a woman? Barely. She was slumped forward, wrists bound with rough hemp, her back heaving in shallow bursts. Her dress, if it could be called that, was torn down the middle, soaked through and clinging to her like skin. Her legs were bare from the knee down, calves streaked in red and filth, and her long, wet hair hung in tangled ropes across her face. She looked up. Her eyes, mud-colored, rimmed with fire and salt, met his. They didn't plead. They didn't ask. They warned. Caleb lowered the lantern. He stood there for a long moment, the rain dripping from the edge of his hat, pooling at his boots. Then he stepped forward and knelt beside her. She flinched. "I ain't gonna hurt you," he said, voice low, cracked from disuse. Her lips moved, but no sound came. "You in labor?" She nodded once, a barely there movement. Her hands were shaking, and her knees gave way. He caught her before she hit the ground, feeling how light she was, like a sack of bones. He untied her wrists carefully. The rope left raw furrows in her skin. She whimpered, not from pain, but from relief, maybe shame. He couldn't tell. Carrying her wasn't hard. She didn't weigh more than a colt. He laid her on a pile of clean hay near the back wall, where the wind didn't reach. The horses were restless, pacing. Caleb lit the second lantern, hung it high, then threw off his coat and covered her legs. Her belly trembled under the fabric. She was farther along than he first thought. "Stay here," he murmured, though she wasn't going anywhere. Back at the house, he boiled water, gathered clean towels, a tin cup, the jar of Maddie's lye soap he'd never brought himself to throw away. His hands were steady. His thoughts were not. Something about the girl pulled the air tight around his ribs. He didn't ask who did this. Didn't need to. The rope said enough. So did the bruises on her collarbone and the dirt under her fingernails, as if she'd clawed her way here from something worse. When he returned, she was half-conscious, whispering names that didn't belong to him. He set the towels down, wiped her forehead, and poured a cup of water. She drank in sips, eyes never fully opening. "Name?" he asked. She coughed, winced, then croaked, "Letty." He nodded. That was enough. The next hour passed slow and brutal. Her contractions came fierce and uneven, her screams muffled into the hay. Caleb did what he could. Maddie had bled out with their second, and the memory made his hands tremble only once. He didn't tell Letty that. He just whispered things he wished someone had told his wife. "You're doing fine. Breathe now. You ain't alone. You're stronger than them." When the baby came, it was a boy. Then a moment later, unexpected, silent, the second followed. A twin. Both blue and slick and too small, but they cried, and Caleb felt something crack behind his ribs. He wrapped them in flannel, placed them beside her, and knelt in the straw. Letty stared at the ceiling, lips parted, eyes glassy. "You done good," he said. She didn't answer, just turned her head toward the babies and wept, soundless. By sunrise, the rain had slowed to a mist. Caleb built a fire inside the barn and sat near it, boots off, shirt sleeves rolled. Letty slept in short bursts, feverish. The babies nestled into her side like kittens. He kept watch. Outside, the first gossip had already begun. Miss Bly had seen tracks. Caleb's wagon wasn't where it should have been. She told the pastor something was amiss. That man's always been odd, you know. And now this. But Caleb didn't care. Not yet. He watched the girl and her son sleep. And when Letty stirred and opened her eyes again, she met his with something different than before. Not trust. Not yet. But maybe the absence of fear. She whispered, "Don't let them take me." "I won't," he said. And he meant it. Somewhere in the distance, the church bell rang once. But in the barn, nothing moved but breath and steam and the quiet beginning of something neither of them had asked for, yet neither would run from. The sky was pale with frost when Caleb stepped into the barn, steam rising off his breath like prayers. The twins were asleep, curled beside their mother beneath his old army coat. Letty didn't stir. Her skin was gray and waxy, her lips dry and cracked, and the fever had set in some time after midnight. Still, she hadn't made a sound. Caleb knelt and laid the back of his hand against her brow. Burning up. He left for the house in long strides, returning moments later with a chipped basin, cloth, and a tin of boiled willow bark soaked in whiskey. He cleaned her, spooned sips of broth into her mouth when she stirred, and wiped her face when she sweat through her shift. When the sun finally broke across the roof, golden light angling in through loose boards, she opened her eyes. "Where am I?" she croaked, her voice as soft as the rustle of hay. "My barn," Caleb said. "You don't remember?" She blinked slowly. "I remember hands. Faces in the dark. A wagon. Rope." Her eyes welled up, but no tears fell. Caleb looked down. "You had 2 boys." She didn't ask to see them. She turned her head to the wall, pressing her cheek to the hay like a woman bracing for impact. "They cried," he added gently. "Loud. You should have heard, Em." Still, she didn't look. He didn't press her. Instead, he lifted the boys one at a time, placed them at her side, and wrapped her arm around them. She let it rest there, like she wasn't sure they were real. That afternoon, a crow perched on the barn's rail and cawed until dusk. The wind had calmed, but the town's voices hadn't. Caleb heard it when he rode into town to fetch more oats, heard the hushed tones behind the mercantile counter, the clucking of tongues, the way the blacksmith's wife turned her back too fast. "Girl from a red daisy," someone muttered as he passed. "Had it coming," someone else said. Never thought Caleb stooped to that. He didn't speak, didn't look at them. He only bought what he needed and returned home, where the barn was warmer than the house. Letty hadn't moved, but her hand now rested lightly on one of the baby's bellies, her fingers twitching in sleep. When he brought her water, she sat up slowly and took the cup without a word. Her movements were wary, like a woman waiting to be struck. "Your name's Caleb," she murmured, as if recalling it from a dream. "Yes, ma'am. I was left to die." He didn't say otherwise. She sipped the water, then lay back. "They stripped me, called me filth, said if I birthed in the church alley, the pastor'd hang me." Her voice was quiet, but even, like she was reciting a lesson learned too well. "I ran. One of 'em tied me like a mule, dragged me to the wagon, said let the coyotes sort it out." Her throat tightened. Her eyes stayed dry. "I don't want no pity. You ain't got it," Caleb said. "You've got rest, and food, and arms to hold you if you need." She looked at him sideways. Why? He didn't know how to answer that. Maybe he didn't want to. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something he hadn't touched in years, a wooden rattle, hand-carved, once meant for a child who never took a breath. He placed it beside her, close enough for the babies to see. She said nothing, but her hand brushed it gently before she turned back toward the wall. That night, the wind howled like something mourning across the plains. Letty didn't sleep. Caleb heard her crying softly, not out loud, but the kind that made the air around her heavier. He didn't go to her. He sat outside, on the porch, whittling a scrap of pine into something shapeless, just to give his hand something to do. Come morning, she was gone. For a breath, his heart stopped, but then he saw her standing at the corral, barefoot, holding one of the twins against her chest, the other resting in a sling made from his old shirt. Her face was turned toward the sky. Sunlight washed her in gold. She wasn't running, just remembering something. He watched from a barn, heart too loud in his chest. She hadn't asked permission. She didn't need to. A few days later, she began helping. Not with words, but with motion. She swept the stalls, fed the hens, washed the babies in the trough using boiled water and soap that smelled like lavender and lye. Her body moved stiffly, like it didn't trust her just yet. But she moved. She never asked to go inside the house. And Caleb didn't invite her. Some lines are best crossed when both parties choose to forget they ever existed. The first time she laughed, it came sudden, surprising both of them. One of the twins, she'd started calling them Jamie, and Eli, had reached up and grabbed a handful of her braid, tugging it like he'd caught a fish. She winced, then laughed, her eyes closing as her shoulders shook with something real. Caleb had been stacking hay. He froze, that laugh echoing in the barn like a bell rung on Easter Sunday. She noticed him watching. The laugh died, but he only tipped his hat and kept working. Later that week, Miss Bly came by. She didn't knock. She stood at the gate in her morning bonnet, eyes hard. "Heard you had company," she said. Caleb wiped his hands on a rag. "I've got livestock. Hired help." "Hired help don't usually have babies." He said nothing. "You ought to be careful, Caleb. This town don't take kindly to whores and barns." That word was a knife. He met her eyes. "This town's kindness don't feed a baby. Or bury a man." She left without another word, her skirts trailing mud behind her. Letty was nearby, pulling weeds from the fence line. She didn't look up. But that night she didn't eat. Just rocked the boys until they fell asleep, then sat in the doorway of the barn, arms around her knees, staring out across the moonlit field like a woman waiting for a verdict she already knew. Caleb sat beside her, holding a chipped tin mug of coffee. "You ain't what they say," he said softly. "I am," she answered. "I just ain't it by choice." He looked out at the same dark horizon. "People say I let my wife die." Letty turned toward him. He didn't explain further. But the silence that followed wasn't cold. One morning, a storm rolled in early. Low clouds, thunder growling behind a ridge. Caleb had to ride to town for feed. And when he returned, he found Letty standing in the rain, arms stretched wide, face to the sky, letting it wash her. The twins were tucked safely in the barn, bundled in straw and wool. She turned slowly as he rode up, her hair dripping, her eyes shining with something like defiance or freedom. He'd never seen her more alive. "You're going to catch your death," he muttered as he dismounted. "I've already died once," she said. "A little rain's nothing." He didn't argue. The next day, she began mending his shirts. Quietly, with careful hands. No thank you passed between them. No explanation needed. And when the pastor arrived that week, offering her a room at the mission and a chance to be cleansed, she looked him dead in the eye and said, "I'm already clean." Caleb didn't smile, but he stood taller beside her. That night, she made stew, thin but hot. They ate it by lamplight, the babies gurgling in the background. She asked him about his horses. He asked her about music. Neither of them answered fully, but the asking was enough. The storm passed. The twins began teething, and Letty began humming again. It wasn't peace yet, but it was beginning to feel like something close. And somewhere deep inside, both of them knew the world wasn't done judging them. But maybe it didn't matter anymore. Not if they kept holding on. The boys had started to crawl. First Jamie, then Eli, like they were racing each other to see who could reach the saddle tack first. Letty would kneel on the barn floor and call to them softly, arms wide, her laughter tucked under her breath. They'd wobble and fall, squeal and try again. The barn had become a world, soft and straw-scented, safe. Outside, the world was colder, more exacting. One morning, Caleb returned from town with canvas sacks of flour, coffee, and oil. He carried them over one shoulder and didn't speak until he reached the porch. Letty stood barefoot just inside the doorframe, wiping her hands on her apron. "Sheriff wants to talk," he said. "Says folks are askin questions." Her jaw tightened. "Let them. Bly's been talking. Said you've bewitched me. that I ain't in my right mind. That's so, Letty said, voice dry as kindling. He nodded. She's calling for a vote. Wants the council to strip me of land rights. Says I ain't maintaining a Christian household. Her laugh was short and sharp. Would she prefer I died under your wagon instead? Caleb didn't answer. He set the sack down and removed a folded paper from his pocket, a notice. Formal, stamped, unsigned but threatening. I can fight it, he said. But they want something gone. Either me or you. Letty crossed her arms, staring out across the field. The wind lifted her hair. Her silence stretched so long he almost stepped away, until she finally said, They don't know how to hurt you. So they'll use me. I won't let 'em. She turned to him. Then don't ask me to hide. That night, she moved into the house, not by invitation, but by necessity. Caleb didn't say a word. He just cleaned out the room that once belonged to his wife sewing, moved in a crib made of pine, and left the door open. She carried in a basin of water and her boys. The porch lamp burned long after midnight. In town, the gossip spread like wildfire on dry grass. The Red Daisy's girls said they knew her kind. She's just waiting till she bleeds him dry. The blacksmith called her a snake. Miss Bly said she'd seen Letty stealing milk from the church pantry, which wasn't true, but sounded true enough. Still, Letty held her head high. She began planting near the fence, radishes, carrots, wild beans from the edge of the property. She tied her hair back in a red scarf and sang when she thought no one could hear. Caleb heard. He'd stop his work just to listen. Quiet, careful, reverent. One evening, he came back from the south pasture, hands blistered and eyes squinting against the light. He found her standing on a stool in the kitchen, hammering a shelf to the wall. He paused. You don't need to do that. I know, she said. I want to. And she did. She cooked meals, simple but warm. She mended socks. She tended to the colicky twin through the night, so Caleb could rest. When the boys cried, she didn't flinch. She just picked them up and rocked, whispering words so soft they sounded like spells. Once, he found her in the barn whispering stories to them, stories about wolves and women who outlived their hunters. That spring, a fire broke out in the church kitchen. No one blamed her. But Miss Bly was quick to remind everyone how sinners brought bad fortune. They'll want a scapegoat, Letty said one night as they ate stew. They always do. Then we give them none, Caleb replied. He rode to town the next morning and paid the overdue lien on his land. He handed over the deed to the clerk with slow hands and eyes that said more than his lips ever would. Then he bought bolts of cloth, fresh milk, and a pair of leather shoes, the first Letty would own in over a year. When he returned, she stood by the fence line, shirt sleeves rolled, arms freckled from the sun. Her hair was pinned up, cheeks flushed. She looked less like a ghost, more like someone who had decided to stay. He handed her the shoes. She held them like something sacred. You didn't have to, she said. I know, he replied. But you shouldn't have to walk barefoot no more. She tried to speak. Her lips parted, closed, parted again. But in the end, she only nodded, a single tear sliding down one cheek. She wiped it away quick. Days grew longer. The boys laughed more. Letty laughed louder. One evening, she laid a quilt out beneath the cottonwood tree. The sun was soft, the sky the color of old peaches. Caleb sat nearby, sharpening his blade. The boys crawled over Letty like kittens. She leaned back, arms behind her, eyes closed. Feels like a life, she said. It is, Caleb answered. A pause. The kind that ripens before breaking. I'm scared it'll get taken, she whispered. That they'll knock on the door and drag me away again. He looked at her. Really looked. They can try. Later that week, Caleb found a box on the porch. No note. Inside, a small wooden cross and a Bible with her name burned into the spine, Letty Monroe. A message disguised as charity. She smiled when she saw it. A crooked, bitter thing. Guess I've been baptized by barn birth. She tucked the Bible on the shelf, beneath a jar of dried rosemary and a tin of sugar. The church came next. The pastor stopped by, hat in hand, words careful. You're welcome among us again, he said. But appearances matter. Caleb stood behind her on the porch. Letty folded her arms. I gave birth on straw and judgment. Forgive me if I don't trust polished pews." The pastor hesitated. Some of the women. "I ain't their kind," she said, "and I don't care to be." When he left, Caleb reached for her hand. She let him. The barn got a fresh coat of paint. The corral was mended. Caleb carved 2 names into a fence post, Jamie and Eli, just above where the sun hit at dusk. And one morning, she surprised him with a gift. A wooden cradle sanded smooth, painted sky blue. "I didn't know what else to do with my hands," she said. He traced the edge of the frame with a callous thumb. "It's beautiful." That night, they ate dinner together at the kitchen table. No babies. Just them. The lamp burned between them like a heartbeat. She wore the red scarf again, this time tied like a ribbon. He reached across the table. She let his fingers touch hers. The wind rustled the curtains, but the house felt steady, held up by hands that didn't shake. Let them say what they want the town. Let them call her sinner, witch, ruin. She had rebuilt herself in silence, nail by nail, breath by breath. And now she was home. The storm rolled in on a Tuesday, the sky swollen purple and bruised over the hills. Caleb had seen it coming since morning. The way the wind shifted, the chickens went quiet, the air too still to be trusted. He stood on the porch with a hand resting on the post, watching the clouds crawl like bruises across the prairie. Inside the house, Letty was humming low, rocking one of the boys who'd cut a tooth and refused sleep. The other lay curled beside a threadbare stuffed rabbit she'd stitched from scraps. The floor creaked with the rhythm of her weight, and something about the sound made Caleb ache in a place deeper than bone. He didn't say anything when he saddled the stallion, only touched the brim of his hat to her as she glanced up. "Won't be long," he said. "Heading to town. Need nails and a new bridle rope." She nodded, sleep in her eyes, hair falling out of its braid. "Bring back sugar. We're near out." He rode fast. The clouds were behind him, stretching long shadows down the gullies, and by the time he reached the general store, the sky had turned to slate. The town was quiet in that uneasy way it got before a downpour. Doors shut tight, porch flags taken in, people watching from behind curtains. Inside the store, Mr. Lyle barely met his eyes. He handed Caleb the sack with stiff fingers. "Word is, you and that girl been playing house." Caleb didn't respond. "She ain't proper," Lyle muttered. "And she's got folks stirred up. Bly and the pastor talked to the judge this morning." Caleb paused, then turned slow. "About what?" Lyle swallowed. "There's a petition. They're claiming immorality, squatting, unfit mothering. They want her off your land. Say, if you don't comply, they'll push for forfeiture." The weight of the sack in Caleb's arms felt suddenly heavier. He left without another word, the bell above the door ringing behind him like a warning. The rain hit halfway home, cold and angry, slicing sideways. The stallion bucked at the lightning, but held course. Caleb's hat was soaked through, coat clinging to his back by the time the cabin came into view. Something felt wrong. The lantern in the front window was gone. He dropped from the saddle and ran. The house was silent. The cradle was empty. A note lay folded on the kitchen table. The words were uneven, ink smudged. "Caleb, I heard what they planned. I won't let you lose everything because of me. You gave me a home when no one else would. That's more than I ever expected. The boys are safer if I go. I'll find a way. I always have. Don't come after me. I couldn't bear it. L. The breath left his body like a shot to the chest. For a moment he couldn't move, couldn't feel. Just stood there, fingers trembling against the grain of the wood, the storm rattling the roof above. Then he turned and burst through the door, calling for the boys. A cry answered from the barn. They were there, both wrapped tight in a basket left by the hearth. Alone, hungry, confused. She hadn't taken them. She was going alone. Caleb didn't stop to change. He grabbed his rifle, mounted the stallion, and rode into the heart of the storm. The prairie was mud and wind. The sky opened above him with thunder that cracked like God's own fury. He followed footprints half vanished in the rain, weaving through the trees near the river bend. Then he saw her. She'd collapsed near the old cedar grove, knees buckled, arms wrapped around her middle. Her dress was soaked, hair plastered to her neck. She didn't hear him at first, not even as the stallion slowed to a halt. She was whispering to herself, forehead against the roots, a prayer or a memory. He couldn't tell. He dismounted, fell to his knees beside her. "Letty." She flinched, tried to push herself up. "I told you. You don't get to decide that alone," he said, voice rough. "You don't get to disappear like you don't matter." Tears came then, silent, sliding down her cheeks like rain. "I didn't want to lose you your land. They'll ruin you. They'll ruin the boys." "I already lost everything once," he said. "Not again. Not like this." Her body trembled. "I was trying to save you. You were always the one saving me." She looked up. In the dark, her face was a pale oval, lips blue, but her eyes were alive. Still fighting. "Can you stand?" he asked. She nodded weakly. He lifted her, arms under knees and back, soaked fabric clinging to both of them. She didn't protest, just rested her head against his chest, breath shuddering. He carried her through the rain. Back at the house, he laid her near the hearth, stoked the fire, and placed her hands around a warm mug. The twins stirred at the sound of her voice. She kissed them both without a word. The next morning, Caleb shaved. He hadn't in months. He put on his cleanest shirt, polished boots, and hitched the wagon. Letty stood beside him, arms folded, babies swaddled on her hip. The wind had calmed. The storm passed, leaving behind a morning soaked in golden light. They rode into town slow. People stopped what they were doing. Children stilled. Miss Bly froze on her porch, cup of tea suspended midair. Caleb stepped down first, helped Letty from the wagon like she was a queen. The boys nestled against her, wide-eyed. He walked straight to the courthouse and laid down the deed. "I own every nail and board on that land," he said, voice echoing through the hallway. "Ain't no law can take that from me." "And the woman?" the judge asked. "She's mine if she wants to be. Not by force. By grace." The judge looked at Letty. She met his gaze without flinching. "No charges have been brought," he muttered. "I suppose nothing more to say." They left before the silence could break. That night, back on the ranch, Caleb painted a new sign above the barn door. "Hope Hill." Letty stood beside him, barefoot in the grass, her hand wrapped around his. "Do you still care what they think?" she whispered. He shook his head. "They can say what they want," she said. "They always have," he answered. "But now," she added softly, "we say it back." He turned to her, brushed a damp strand of hair from her face. "What would you say?" She looked at the boys, the land, the sky, then at him. That this place was watered by grace. And grace, when tended, grows. The stars blinked on like prayers. The wind carried laughter through the fields. And somewhere deep in the bones of the house, something broken had healed.